All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come now to the part of the program where we're coming to just about the tip of finding out who the new Mrs. Universe will be. In our next and final round of the competition, ladies and gentlemen, all our 38 delegates will come out in exquisite evening wear. And this is where we'll share with you information about what these ladies are really made of. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to put your hands together and welcome the ladies back in the elegant evening wear round.
She's a director of a charity pageant for children, and she owns a motorcycle transport company, and she drives the tow truck. She likes netball, she spends time with her daughters, and she likes cooking Japanese food.
Our next delegate greeting you is Mrs. Australia, Francesca McMillan. She's a festival and event coordinator. She's also a charity ambassador, and she owns a Bollywood dance school. In her spare time, whenever she can, she loves to dance and is also a choreographer. She also loves to perform on stage, and of course, she's a doting mother. Mrs. Australia, Francesca McMillan.
Mrs. Belarus, Natalia Trofimova. Mrs. Belarus is a lawyer who has her own firm, and she's been practicing for 15 years. She is a solicitor and advocate. She also enjoys swimming, and she's a travel writer as well. Mrs. Belarus.
The world is getting smaller. Mrs. Belgium is Crystal Verhelst. She's an account manager for international firm Google. In her spare time, she loves to travel and find out more about other cultures. She's also involved in charity work in Africa. She loves to read plenty of books to keep herself well informed. Mrs. Belgium.
I can see why Raymond has Brazil on his mind. Mrs. Brazil. Patricia Scheide. Mrs. Brazil is also a lawyer and also a ballerina. So of course she enjoys dancing, reading, and she likes going to the movies too. Mrs. Brazil.
Time for us to say hello to Mrs. Cambodia. This is Sapo Rendall. She's the managing director of a top modeling agency back home. She's a business owner, of course, and in her spare time, naturally she loves modeling and fashion, but she also loves to golf. And I understand her handicap is better than hers. Mrs. Cambodia.
Please welcome now Mrs. Canary Islands, Miriam Cruz. And don't judge a book By its cover, Mrs. Canary Islands is an accountant. She enjoys singing, sports, dancing, and reading.
Mrs. Canary Islands, ladies and gentlemen. The warm greetings must be for Mrs. China. This is Bing Yu Jiang. She works in a TV station back home and is a media and marketing executive. She's also the chairperson of 2 other companies. In her spare time, she loves to sing romantic songs and swims at least 10 laps a day. Mrs. China.
And now we welcome Mrs. England. Mrs. England teaches healthy cooking. She's a Goodwill Ambassador for breast cancer. She's an image consultant and a model. She enjoys dancing and cooking. And I did say, does she eat her own food? She said yes. And Mrs. England's husband and 2 children are here with her.
And we call her husband Mr. England.
Mrs. England, ladies and gentlemen.
Mrs. Guatemala greeting you now. She's Jamie Perez. She's a business administrator in a large company back home. She loves cooking spicy food. She enjoys swimming and football. In fact, at one time she almost wanted to be a professional footballer. Women's team, Mrs. Guatemala.
And now say homo to Mrs. Hong Kong, Ling Fang Zhang. Mrs. Hong Kong is a businesswoman in every woman's dream industry. She's in the shoe business. And to relax, she plays golf and she plays the piano as well. Mrs. Hong Kong. Now we say namaste to Mrs. India, Ashleen Chand. Mrs. India owns her own transport company and she loves Bollywood dancing. Mrs. India.
Let's say hello once again to Mrs. Italy. She's Carmen Rosa Dionisio, a marketing and productions for events. She loves playing volleyball, going to the movies, catching up with the latest, of course. And she also loves all the latest Transformers series. She enjoys going to the theater and volunteering for anything that is meaningful and worthwhile. Mrs. Italy.
Please welcome Mrs. Japan, Yoshimi Ishiyama. Mrs. Japan is a grooming coach and she also teaches social etiquette. She teaches children as well. She likes walking, she's very artistic, she likes drawing and going to the movies. Mrs. Japan.
Here's Mrs. Latina USA, Gina Marcela Garcia. She's a qualified industrial engineer and she also teaches. She's the industrial engineer at the Aerospatial Company. In her spare time, get a load of this, she loves to dance, paint, and she teaches algebra in her spare time for whoever has time to learn. Mrs. Latina USA.
Our next delegate is Mrs. Latvia, Anita Puzole. Mrs. Latvia, I think I don't even have to tell you, is a personal trainer and a fitness and bodybuilding champion. She loves traveling and modeling, and of course, fitness is her thing. Mrs. Latvia.
And you can tell that she's into bodybuilding, a well-defined muscles.
I can see that.
Don't see that here. Let's say hello to Mrs. Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, to Su Ang.
A big round of applause.
She's a singer who's won 3 singing competitions so far. And in her spare time, she loves singing to improve her singing. She also loves to dance and cook. Now, one of her specialties is double-boiled soups of all types. Mrs. Malaysia.
And now we welcome Mrs. Mauritius, Sylvana Jean-Charles. Mrs. Mauritius is an administrative manager and she loves dancing. She's another delegate who likes cooking. I can't see whether any of them ever eat what they cook. And of course, she loves going out with her family. Mrs. Mauritius.
This is Mrs. Mexico, ladies and gentlemen, Yesenia Navarro. She may look familiar to some of you because she's an actress. She's also a model and a dancer. Yes, she is an actress. If you have access to those satellite channels, you might have seen her. In her spare time, she loves baking, dancing, working out, traveling with family. Mrs. Mexico, ladies and gentlemen.
Now we say namaste once again to Mrs. Nepal. Rajani Papa is her name, and Mrs. Nepal works with women who have been sexually exploited in her home country. In fact, she is the Goodwill Ambassador for the cause, and she owns a dairy farm. So she also sells milk.
Mrs. Nepal, ladies and gentlemen. Greeting you now is Mrs. Netherlands, Angelica Smeding. She's a professional designer, designing fashion wear, of course, and she owns a fashion design house and has her own label. It's called Taboo, by the way. And in her spare time, she loves to do anything and everything related to designing. I bet you Apple will be looking for her. Mrs. Netherlands, ladies and gentlemen.
Our next delegate is Mrs. New Zealand, Merciana Suis. Mrs. New Zealand owns an online beauty store. She's also a computer engineer, and in New Zealand she works with a charity, Casper. She loves dancing, cooking. She loves athletics and netball, so you can see she's fit. Mrs. New Zealand.
Here's Mrs. Nicaragua, ladies and gentlemen. You will remember she's the winner of the Best National Costume as we began a competition tonight. Alicia Cabrera. She owns 2 boutiques with a wide range of ladies' fashion wear. Very exquisitely designed. In fact, this gown is from her own boutique. In her spare time, she loves to dance, play tennis, and of course, like all Mrs. Universes here today, they love to spend plenty of time with their family. Mrs. Nicaragua.
Introducing Mrs. North America, Teresa Scanlon. Mrs. North America is a TV host and consultant, and she's very interested in home design. She loves tennis and boating. Mrs. North America.
Here's Mrs. Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, Mariam Muhammad. Her career is involving project management as well as association management. In her spare time, she loves yoga to keep herself flexible and spiritually connected. She also enjoys shopping, cooking, as well as dancing. Mrs. Pakistan.
And now say mabuhay to Mrs. Philippines, Hemelin Escudero Tamayo. Mrs. Philippines is the owner of a university and a hospital. She has lots of hobbies: singing, reading, cooking, traveling, and watching movies as well. Mrs. Philippines.
Our next delegate, ladies and gentlemen, in this exquisite evening wear is Mrs. Poland Anastasia Ayatava. She's a doctor by profession. Yes.
I can see you getting sick a lot. Have you lived in Poland?
In her spare time, she loves modeling, designing, fashion, and jewels. Great doctor, Mrs. Poland. Can't wait to get sick.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Russia, Ekaterina Plotko. Mrs. Russia is a professional photographer and a yoga instructor. She enjoys yoga and fitness, of course, and traveling, which is where I'm sure she takes all of the beautiful photographs. Mrs. Russia.
Mrs. Scotland, Nikki Sanghera. A business owner. Her business is hair and beauty. She also owns one of the largest online jewelry stores in Scotland. We'll let you find out what online store that is. Google it. Mrs. Scotland enjoys swimming, shopping and dancing when she's not online making money. Mrs. Scotland.
Please welcome now Mrs. Siberia, Valentina Chevtaeva. Mrs. Siberia is a bank officer. And dancing is her favorite thing. Mrs. Siberia.
You know, a recent research shows that 75% of bank officers love to dance. 75%. Here's Mrs. Singapore, ladies and gentlemen, Cheryl Ho. She's a flight stewardess who loves traveling naturally. Turn your passion into work, a good paying job. cooking, dancing, and doing charity work. Cheryl Ho is Mrs. Singapore.
And now, welcome Mrs. South Africa, Shanae de Kock. Mrs. South Africa is a health consultant, a writer, and a blogger. She loves reading and blogging. And she has 3 children. Mrs. South Africa.
And this elegant evening wear, ladies and gentlemen, here's Mrs. South Korea, Lee Asia. She is what we call a healthy lifestyle advisor. She should give us advice. Her hobbies include cooking. What does she cook? Healthy food. Of course, we wouldn't know what that is. And she loves to travel the world and gain new experiences as well. Mrs. South Korea.
Now it's time to say bienvenidos to Mrs. Spain, Thais Arias. Mrs. Spain is a newspaper journalist and another delegate who loves dancing.
She says she's on leave, so she's not reporting this forum tonight. Mrs. Spain, ladies and gentlemen, Thais Arias. Mrs. Thailand, Nok Chai Komrong, a dance and business owner. She is the founding shareholder of an investment company back home in Thailand. And when she's not helping her clients make huge profits, she keeps herself fit with a very strict fitness regime. And her hobbies include cooking, naturally Thai delicacies, which are spicy, and she also loves to model. Mrs. Thailand.
Please welcome now Mrs. Ukraine, Anna Sontseva. Mrs. Ukraine is a qualified psychologist. And when she's not working, her favorite hobby is photography. Mrs. Ukraine.
Yes, Mrs. United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, Robin Morrison. She's a police officer. I know what you guys are thinking. If you ever get arrested, she should be the one to arrest you. Same thing I had in my mind. In her spare time, she loves to dance, and she also is a cheerleading coach. She arrests you and then she cheerleads. Fitness instructor on the side. Police officer, Mrs. United Kingdom.
Our final delegate, Mrs. USA, Sabrina Pina. Mrs. USA is a business owner. She's a designer and she designs faces with makeup. She's a dancer. She's a fitness instructor. And ladies and gentlemen, she's a biker girl. She likes motorcycling. Mrs. USA.
And she loves, you know what her bike is? Harley Davidson. Mrs. USA.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, all our gorgeous 38 delegates for the Mrs. Universe 2014 World Finals. And let's see them all one more time. Please give them a big warm round of applause. The Mrs. Universe 2014 World Finals delegates. Please give them a big round of applause.